Alright everyone, welcome to Riley Murray Book Reviews. As always, I'm Riley, and this week we will be reviewing Artemis Fowl Book 6, Atlantis Complex. If you guys have been enjoying all this content, please do not forget, like, share, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you do not miss one of my videos. As always, format for the book review, summary of the story, pros, cons, and then my final thoughts and rating of the book. So, without any further ado, let's hit the review. Shortly after the events of Time Paradox, Artemis has called a meeting in the Arctic between Holly, Foaly, and himself to discuss his next big project, his effort to try and combat global warming with a crazy idea to use a souped-up ice maker to shoot nano wafers into the atmosphere in order to help cooling it down. But unbeknownst to everyone, Artemis is now suffering from a condition the fairy people know as Atlantis Complex, which was brought about by a combination of him feeling guilty for what he did to his mother, his stolen fairy magic. All that put together basically caused his Atlantis Complex to appear. But before they can really contain the situation and get Artemis examined for the Atlantis Complex, the meeting is attacked by a new unknown threat, so it is up to Holly, Artemis, and Foaly to get everyone to safety and to alert Haven as to what's going on at the moment. Jumping right into the pro section, I'm going to be talking about Holly and Foaly's reaction to Orian. Quick explanation on Orian before I really get into this. As part of Artemis's Atlantis Complex, he basically develops a split personality, and that split personality comes out as the character Orian, which is basically Artemis, but without his sort of ego, basically. It's the best parts of Artemis, but without the sort of arrogance that we've come to know and sometimes like about Artemis. So Orion's basically the very opposite of Artemis. He's very chill, very happy, very go with the flow, whereas Artemis is super controlling. Orion's the complete opposite of Artemis. I really like how Colfer wrote Holly and Foaly's absolute shock at just Orian and his personality, because both of them are very much more used to dealing with the more ego-driven Artemis than this sort of nice, good guy Orian. And Colfer does, again, an excellent job at writing their complete shock at this. Foaly and Holly are absolutely just confused as heck as to what's going on, because they kind of know that Artemis is suffering from Atlantis, though the two of them were really the first to understand what was going on. But the two of them really didn't expect Artemis to just suddenly develop a second personality within his head and it be completely different from himself. Colfer does a very good job at writing their annoyance, because the two of them are in a life or death situation where they really need Artemis's brain power, but they don't have that. They don't have the mastermind of Artemis. They just have Orian, who has some of Artemis's own knowledge, but not really the temperament for what they need. They need Artemis's ruthless planning abilities, but they don't have that at the moment. They just have Orian. Colfer writing their absolute just bewilderment and shock at dealing with Orian is absolutely hilarious. Second thing I'm going to be talking about for the pro section is the pure betrayal that Butler feels within this book because of Artemis's actions under the influence of the Atlantis Complex. As part of Artemis's Atlantis Complex, he gets a really big dose of paranoia, and Artemis was already a pretty paranoid person normally, but put in some sort of crazy mental episode like this Atlantis Complex thing, and it just ratchets up Artemis's normal paranoia way high. When Artemis is under the influence of the Atlantis Complex, he sends Butler on this wild goose chase because Artemis believes that Butler is in on some crazy conspiracy to stop what he's doing. He thinks that the fairies are somehow involved in all this, and it is just a weird conspiracy theory that Artemis has going on inside of his head. But back to what I was talking about. So Artemis sends Butler on a crazy wild goose chase, making Butler believe that Juliet is in danger. What's really cool is that we get to see Butler's perspective of that when it's happening, and throughout that entire section of the book, Butler very much feels betrayed once he figures out what's going on. He realizes that Artemis is not there at all, and he doesn't blame Artemis, he understands, but he still feels very hurt by what Artemis did. Artemis made Butler believe Juliet was in danger from some unknown threat. And then he sent Butler off again on a wild goose chase, and then Butler comes back to find that Artemis is in the grips of some sort of mental crisis. The betrayal Butler feels is very well written from Golfer, because I feel like if any of us had been in Butler's position and we had faced what Artemis had put us through, we would definitely feel very betrayed. So I do feel like Golfer did a really good job at writing the parts of the book where Butler's involved. That was very good, and it's very interesting because Butler, for the most part, hasn't had a whole lot to do by himself. I mean, there are a couple of things, but for the most part, he's always been sort of attached to Artemis, so it's good to see Butler getting his own arc in this book, and I really do feel like Golfer did a very good job writing that. Okay, so I'm going to get the elephant in the room out of the way and talk about Orion first. Like I said when I talked about how I liked Holly and Foaly's reaction to Orion because it very much mirrored my reaction to Orion as a character, I'm going to go more in depth into Orion right now, particularly why I do not like this character. First of all, he is very annoying. I get what Golfer was going for, a very annoying character that would drive everyone insane, but I feel like Golfer did too good of a job. Orion, I think, makes this book suffer so much because all of us love Artemis as a character. We love seeing him grow as a person. That's why we read these books. We love Artemis as a character. But when you take Artemis out and put this annoying substitute for him into the series, the book suffers a lot. I know, again, what Golfer was going for, but I feel like he overdid it with Orion. He's just way too much for this book, and it drags this book down a lot. And a lot of his dialogue is supposed to be funny, but it's only funny up until a certain point. Then it's just kind of like, okay, can we please get the main heart of the story back? When Artemis finally breaks out of the Atlantis Complex, at least temporarily, the book is better and it gets back on track, so that's a good thing. I don't know how I would have liked the book if Orion was in command the entire time. That would have just been way too much. At least Golfer had the foresight to be like, okay, I don't want Orion to be in command the entire time. Let's have Artemis do something. That was very much a good call on Golfer's part because, again, I don't know how this book would have been perceived if Orion was in command full time. Now, don't get me wrong, Orion as an idea is a good one. Like, I like the idea of showing Artemis his alter ego, and that just happens to be Orion. But I feel like this book could have worked a bit better if Golfer had just kind of turned down Orion's sort of more annoying qualities. Orion maybe, I think, could have worked better if he was a mixture of Artemis's intelligence, but it was balanced and he wasn't as driven by greed and ambition. Then I think Orion would have worked a lot better as a character. I'll get to the wasted potential of Orion in the next section, but I feel like Golfer had a good idea for a character, but he just overdid it and let Orion run wild, and it very much made the book suffer in the long run. Alright, so for con number 2, I'm going to be talking about the wasted potential that Orion had in this book. What I also think could could have made Orion work better is, like I said, toning down his more annoying points and balancing his personality a little bit, but also, as Orion and Holly are working together, we could jump to Holly's perspective on Orion. We do that several times within the book, but what I think could have worked better is, say Holly is working together with Orion, and then Holly realizes, like, this is the person I want Artemis to be. A very good, very unselfish person. This is the person that Artemis can be, but his nature isn't this. Maybe we could have made Holly realize maybe this is the true Artemis that's buried deep down inside him somewhere. This good and gentle soul exists, and maybe like Orion could be the version of Artemis that Holly wants him to become. But that, and Holly just kind of has to accept that and be like, okay, I want you to be Orion, but I'll accept that you'll probably never be that person. And that could have been a very interesting idea to put into this book. Realize having Holly work beside the version of Artemis that she really wants and knows that he can be, and then her having to comes to terms with the fact that he'll probably never be that person. That would have been a very, I think, interesting idea Holly and the book to grapple with. That was definitely a missed opportunity, I think, on Cofer's part, that to not put a sort of interesting idea like that into the book. Third and final thing I'm going to talk about for the con section is the villain for this book, Turnball. So there's a very particular reason why I put Turnball Root in the con section. Mainly it's because I just find him a very boring villain for this book. He's a very forgettable villain for this book and just in the series in general. I always forget that Turnball is kind of even in this series in the first place as a villain, and he only shows up in this book, and it's not like he does anything memorable like with John Spyro or anything like that. No, he's just kind of in this book, and he's not interesting. He's not as interesting as Cowboy or those guys. I kind of can't really think of anything that Cofer could have really done to make Turnball a more interesting character. I guess Turnball just had to be in this book. Turnball's a very weak antagonist for this book. Cofer tries to give him a somewhat relatable motivation, but Turnball just kind of falls flat as a villain for me. And I don't know if anyone else agrees with that, but if you do, please let me know. And if you don't, please explain in the comments why you don't. I want to hear you guys' thoughts on Turnball Root in general. But at least to me, he is a very unneeded villain. Like, he's largely pointless. If you took Turnball out of Atlantis Complex in general, you really wouldn't lose anything too big. He's just unnecessary in my view. Weirdly enough, I feel like the book would have been better if we'd followed the Young Opel that's on the run from the past to sort of explain what happens next book. But again, I don't feel like Turnball really needs to be the villain in this book. He's not very interesting, and he doesn't really bring anything interesting into the story in general, at least to my perspective. Okay guys, so final thoughts on the book here. To be completely honest, I do kind of consider this the weakest of the Artemis Fowl books. It's unconsequential for the larger Artemis Fowl story in general. It's not like they bring Orion back in any meaningful way, so you would kind of have to read this book to understand where Orion came from. He doesn't come back. The Atlantis Complex never becomes a thing again. This book largely is inconsequential. It doesn't matter because nothing from this makes an appearance in the other books in general. So it's like, you could skip this book entirely in the series and you'd be fine. You wouldn't lose a whole lot. That's kind of a shame for me because I like the Artemis Fowl series so much. Arctic Incident is always kind of this big elephant in the room. There's just Arctic Incident at the very end of the series that it's kind of the weakest book before the last book of the series. I hate to rag on Atlantis Complex, but Atlantis Complex largely is unneeded in the series. series, and it's kind of a shame that that's the case. Okay guys, so I'm going to be giving Atlantis Complex a 6 out of 10. Okay guys, thank you so much for making it to the end of the video. If you enjoyed it, please do not forget, like, share, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you do not miss anything. If you guys want to check out the rest of my Artemis Fowl videos, I will leave a link to the Artemis Fowl playlist up in the corner if you guys want to go and check that one out. As always, if you guys want to check out my social media, my Instagram is Riley Murray Book Reviews, and my Twitter is Riley T. Murray. I will leave links to both of those accounts down in the description if you guys want to go and check those out. Down in the comments, if you guys have your own thoughts on Artemis Fowl series in general, or this book in particular, please do not be afraid to leave those down in the comments, and I would love to discuss. As always, if you guys have books you want me to do reviews on in the future, do not be afraid to leave them down in the comments. Alright everyone, I will see you guys next video. Hope you guys have a great week, and don't forget, keep on reading.